A young mother had a son, a kind-hearted boy who always tried to do what's right. As he grew older, he worried about others more than himself. Whenever he saw anyone suffering, he tried to heal and comfort them, but more people became sick. Disease ravished the land. People were quarantined, isolated. Many didn't survive. It became too much, and he had to isolate himself. He cried as he thought about all the unbearable things that people were going through. The mental anguish racked him with sorrow, but it was his cross to bear.
It's New York in 1985, and Bridget Gurney is walking home from a dentist appointment. And as she walks, something horrible happens. A massive construction crane that would sit up top of a skyscraper falls. She's not aware of it, and it's falling, and she's walking, and it happened so fast. Before she knew it, she realized she was pinned by the legs underneath this massive piece of equipment, this crane that had fallen on her. And of course, people responded quickly. They called the 911, they called the police, they called the paramedics, and everybody came, and they did the best they could. But the reality was, being crushed underneath this crane, it was going to take a long time before they could cut it out and not hurt her and not hurt anyone else and move this massive crane. And the medical people were amazing, and they came and they stabilized her and they got her ready. And then Paul Raganese showed up, an EMT, eager to help, eager to do something, but there really wasn't anything obvious for him to do. The guys that were working on the crane trying to cut it apart and lift it off, and again, she had been stabilized, and he felt useless for a moment. So he did the only thing he could. He held her hand. He held her hand while she was pinned underneath. He held her hand while they were working on her. He held her hand while they were removing the equipment. He held her hand for 6 hours out of compassion, because he knew he couldn't really do much, but he wanted to do something. And that compassion that he felt for her moved her to action. Bridget actually just passed away in 2021. She lived to be 85. She was able to walk again. And a few months after this happened, as she was getting ready to leave the hospital, a New York City news station came and covered it, because this was big news. This was amazing that this woman not only survived, but looked like she was going to walk. And they came and they interviewed her as she was leaving the hospital, and they said, "You've gone through all this incredible things. What brought you through this? How did you get through it? What made the difference?" She said very simply, "He held my hand. My darkest moment, a stranger came and he held my hand, and it made all the difference for me." That small act of compassion she looked back and pointed to that got her through one of the most difficult moments of her life. And I have a feeling for a lot of us, it's not hard to remember, because it always stands out. It's always so striking. It's not hard to remember when somebody showed compassion to you. Maybe you lost something, maybe there was an accident, maybe an illness, maybe a struggle, a difficulty, maybe you made a mistake or you failed big, and somebody, either literally or figuratively, put their arm around your shoulder and they were with you. They went through it with you. They walked with you. They held your hand. They encouraged you, whatever it is they might have done. But they showed compassion to you. And here's what I've discovered about compassion. I don't like needing compassion, because if you think about it, it means something bad went wrong, right? I mean, we don't need compassion if things aren't going wrong. So I don't like needing compassion, but I love getting compassion when I need it. And my guess is you're the same way. We all want compassion when we feel a sense of brokenness, when the pain in our hearts, and sometimes it's physical pain, but so many times it's emotional, it's spiritual. There's something going inside of us that just hurts, and we don't know what to do with it. We know it's not right, and it feels broken, and we love receiving compassion from somebody. They don't have to get it. They don't have to understand it all. Paul didn't know what it felt like to be trapped under a crane for 6 hours, but he knew about being in pain. He could identify with that. And I think for all of us, we're happy to receive compassion. I think it gets a little tougher when it comes to giving compassion. Because at least for me, here's my story. I understand my heartbreak. but I don't always understand other people's heartbreak. And so while we would love to be the kind of person that would rush in and show compassion anytime somebody's struggling, sometimes we hold back. Sometimes we're a little bit hesitant, and it could be something as simple as, I have so many problems of my own. I got so much difficulty and heartbreak and struggle going on in my own life. It is really hard to actually have compassion and show compassion to somebody else in the middle of my struggle. Sometimes it's because of what's happening to us. Sometimes it's not quite as legit. Sometimes we're just busy. We're busy doing a lot of things. I know you guys are busy. You got families and jobs and spouses and stuff and friends and things, and stuff's always moving and popping. I get it. We're busy. The reality is a lot of our busy is stuff that's urgent. It's screaming at us. You got to go here. You got to go there. You got to do this for work. You got to go to this party. You got to do this thing this afternoon. You got to get kids to practice. You got to. But a lot of it's not that important. Right? It's urgent, but it's not really that important. But sometimes those urgent things crowd out the important things, and showing compassion is one of those important things that can get overshadowed because I got a lot of stuff going on, places to be, the kids are doing things and stuff. I don't have it. And unfortunately, sometimes it's even darker than that. And again, I'll be the first to confess. Maybe none of you have ever felt this way, and if you are, that's fantastic. You're great people. But as your pastor, I am willing to admit sometimes my compassion is throttled because the person that's near me, the person that's around me, that's hurting and broken, I don't really see eye to eye with them. We don't really agree on a lot of things about morality or politics or culture or life choices or those kind of things. We're not really on the same page. And truth be told, kind of the things they're doing is part of the reason that they're hurting. And so, I kind of hold back sometimes because, we're different. And because we're so different, I don't really know if it'd be right for me to show compassion in the middle of that difference. Like I said, I understand my brokenness. I understand my heartbreak. I don't always understand other people's heartbreak. And compassion, before we go any further, compassion is one of those things that it's kind of important to define it. Because a lot of times we hear the word compassion, and what it's easy to do is kind of make a mistake. And the mistake is that, compassion means to feel bad. Like, I feel bad for this person, or I feel bad about what happened, or I wish things were different, or, oh man, that seems like that would be really a painful thing, and so I'm sorry you're going through that. And that's a good thing, but that's more sympathy or empathy. Compassion takes that a step further. Compassion says, no, I have to do something about it. It's not just that I feel bad that you're going through a hardship. It's not just that I feel bad that you're brokenhearted. I feel like, and I am willing to do something. It takes action. See, feeling compassion moves me to action. It's almost in the word. Compassion and action, they go together. They're tied together. You can't have one without the other. You cannot have compassion without taking some sort of action. Probably the most compassionate person that's ever lived is Jesus. Because even Jesus' critics, even the people that doubt he existed, doubt what he said, argued with him, almost nobody could deny that he was compassionate. And so if you have a Bible, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 9 in just a moment. Or if you want to follow along in the app, I encourage you to do that. But we're going to read a summary in just a second. But let me kind of summarize all of what's been happening. If you were to read Matthew chapter 9, you would encounter a couple of pretty amazing stories. The first thing we come across is Jesus is putting all this compassion, all this stuff into action. The first thing we come across is Jesus meets a man who has got an incredible physical problem. It's obvious. As a matter of fact, his friends have to bring him to Jesus. But Jesus sees right through the fact that he can't walk to the truth that there was something broken inside of him at a spiritual level. And so this man is kind of dropped in front of Jesus, and Jesus does something incredible. He heals his spiritual issues and he heals his physical issues. He does something about it. The very next moment, it seems like Jesus is on the move, and he calls a man named Matthew to follow him. Matthew that wrote the Gospel of Matthew. And you might think, well, what's the big deal about that? Matthew was somebody that almost everybody hated because he was a traitor, because he was collecting taxes for the Romans, because he was the vehicle that was creating poverty for most of the regular everyday folks. And Jesus comes to this man that nobody likes, that nobody wants to be around, and he says, Matthew, not only do I accept you, I want you to follow me. It was stunning. Nobody extended compassion to somebody like Matthew. The very next episode, he's moving, he's on his way, and a man comes up to him and says, would you come please heal my daughter? And what's interesting about this man is this man could very easily have been one of Jesus's enemies, one of his critics, one of the people that doubted him, that talked bad about him, that was trying to get him in trouble potentially. And he says, would you come heal my daughter? He comes and he heals his daughter, and on the way to heal this man's daughter, he runs into a woman that everybody thought was dirty and immoral, that everybody said, stay away from her. Nobody wanted to deal with her. Called her daughter, and he healed her. And then the very last episode, he comes across another man, this man that had made some choices, some moral choices, some spiritual choices that put him in a very dark and ugly place. Much like an addict, he was trapped by the things he had done and the choices he had made. And Jesus frees him from that. I mean, it's almost like a boxer just hammering away. It's compassion after compassion after compassion after compassion. And then finally, in Matthew 9:35, Matthew summarizes something pretty incredible. 9:35, it says, Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, healing every disease and sickness. And when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into the harvest field. And we're going to talk about that for a second, but it's just a summary that this man called Jesus, that everybody agreed with. He was compassionate. And he had an agenda, as he tells us. He's got a reason behind this. But when I read those stories, and when I read that summary, it makes me kind of wrestle, and maybe you too. I think it asks all of us to wrestle with a couple of questions. It's easy to read it and kind of knock it off. Well, Jesus is a good guy. Yeah, I've kind of heard that. I knew that, you know. and I went to church, and they said Jesus was nice, and he helped people. Like, yeah, I got that. I mean, I get that. They tell me that every time. But if you're willing to go half a step further, I think as you read these descriptions and you read this summary, it forces you to ask yourself some questions. And the very first question is, do I see what Jesus sees? Do I see what Jesus sees? Now, I don't know about you. I went to Central High School right here in downtown Phoenix. Woohoo! Yeah, there's none of you else went there, I know. You're like, really? And you got out alive? Yeah, I did. I went to Central High School in downtown Phoenix. And probably your high school was similar in that we had lots of groups, right? We had the jocks, we had the nerds, we had the preppies, we had the cool kids, we had the stoners, that's what we called them. You know, we had all of these groups, and that's what you did, right? You looked around and you were kind of like, okay, I got to figure out which group I'm a part of and which group I need to stay away from and which group are you in, and we grouped everybody, right? That's just what we did. We tagged them with some kind of name or identifier so we could talk about them. We still do it today. We're just a little more sophisticated about it. You know, now it's millennials and boomers, right? Or it's conservatives and liberals, or it's Christians, which could be either good or bad, depending on who's saying it, right? We have all these tags that we use. And we see people in groups. And we see people as segments. And we even do it individually. Like, I do. We do it individually. Like, for example, if I'm running late and I'm going to be late, you know what I do? I give myself permission. I tell myself, you know, you're working hard, you got a lot of responsibilities, you're trying to do important things, and gosh, you just sometimes, every once in a while, things just go against you and you're late. You know what I do when somebody else is late? Oh, they're kind of lazy, right? They're disorganized, aren't they? I mean, they just can't seem to get it together and be on time. What's so hard about that, right? We do this all the time. We put people in groups, we tag them, we make assumptions about them, and we just kind of file it away. And I understand why. In some ways, we have to. We can't process everything otherwise. But you know what happens when we tag people and put them in groups and make up labels for them? We stop seeing people. We just see stuff. We just see obstacles or allies. But we don't really see people. Do I see what Jesus sees? So Jesus goes through all these towns and villages, and he sees people. He doesn't see groups. He doesn't see tags. He doesn't see labels. He sees people. People that were hurting. People that had experienced heartbreak. We're going to talk about that in just a second, but he saw that they had experienced heartbreak. He could have seen, get this, he's Jesus, right? He could have seen all these dirty, messed up people, right? Like, they can't get anything right. How many times have we showed them? How many chances have we given them? How many times have they heard what they're supposed to do and they won't do it? He didn't see that. He could have seen people that were his enemies, that worked against him, that criticized him, that were always in conflict with him, that were trying to trap him. He could have seen them as people that he had to overcome. Or he could have even kind of just been neutral. Well, there's a lot of people out there, but I got my followers. I got to concentrate on my guys. I don't have time to engage with everybody else. I got to concentrate on my guys. But he didn't. He saw people. Went through these towns, went through these villages, and he saw people in the middle of their heartbreak. And he didn't see them as enemies. He saw them as victims of his enemy. He saw them as helpless. He saw them as harassed. He saw them as people that really needed a leader, somebody that could come in and do something. So do I see what Jesus sees? Second question we got to ask ourselves when we understand this compassion that flows out of him. Do I feel what Jesus feels? Do I feel what Jesus feels? We don't have time, and in some ways I wish we did, for everybody to share what's your latest heartbreak. Because unfortunately, most of them haven't. We got them right here, ready to go. I can share them quickly. The last big disappointment, the last loss that you experienced, maybe it was a loss of a relationship, or maybe it was actually, there's a loss of somebody's life. Maybe it was a decision. The last decision you made that you really regret. Oh, I'd take that back if I could. I wish I hadn't done that. Or maybe it was a decision somebody else made. And the blowback hit you, right? I mean, you didn't do anything wrong. They made a decision, and it's caused you all kinds of frustration and pain. See, we've all experienced heartbreak in some form or fashion. My latest heartbreak, I lost my mom in December, and going through that loss, as well as going through moments where I see people making decisions that they're moving away from God, these things break my heart. It's different than yours. You've got your own stuff. But it's really not that different. You see, when it comes to heartbreak, you don't have to experience exactly the same thing that somebody else experienced. You don't have to go through the same pain and the same struggle and the shame that they felt to be able to identify with them. Because down underneath it, you know exactly what heartbreak feels like. It hurts. Your heartbreak and my heartbreak, the variables, how we got there, completely different. Where we are and what we're feeling, pretty much the same. And that's what Jesus keyed on. Like I said, Paul didn't have to be under the crane with Bridget to know that she was in pain and that she needed compassion. And Jesus sees these people as he goes through these towns. And moved by compassion, he has to respond to the pain and the struggle and the ache that they feel. He feels what they feel, and it moves him to action. It doesn't just create a little click that, oh, man, that's bad. Oh, should avoid that. Oh, I wish that hadn't happened. It draws something out of him. Because of what he feels, he has to take action. He saw them one at a time, individually, and he felt along with them. Just kind of a side note. If you want to reduce the amount of compassion that you feel and eventually eliminate the compassion that you feel, it's very easy to do. All you have to do is ignore and isolate and judge people that are different from you. If you do that consistently, you will reduce any shred of compassion in you, and you can completely eliminate it if that's your goal. That I'll just isolate myself from anybody that's different from me. I will just ignore anybody that's in pain, and I will just judge people because they probably are getting what they deserve, and I can effectively kill compassion in me. But Jesus' response is completely different. He says, no, I'm going to identify with. I'm going to walk in. I'm going to feel alongside, and then I'm going to do. So will I see what Jesus sees? Will I feel what Jesus feels? Third question, last question. Will I do what Jesus does? You know, one of the things that's kind of inspiring about Jesus, but frustrating is not the right word, but kind of confusing, I guess, is maybe a better word, is Jesus steps into these situations and he shows compassion. And I'm right alongside cheering along. Yeah, I'd love to do that. I want to be like that. I want to do that. And then he does a miracle and heals them. And I'm like, I can't do that. I can't heal somebody. I can't fix things. I can't do the things that he did. That's kind of the surface level. But if you go a little further, he did a whole lot more than that, actually. He did heal people. There's no question about it. But you know the other thing he did that was maybe just as important? Because, and I hate to break it to you, do you know that everybody Jesus healed eventually died? Right? I mean, it was a temporary thing in one sense. But maybe just as important as their healing, you know what else he did? He restored people's dignity. He valued them. He saw them. He realized that this person in front of me is made in the image of God, and they matter, and they are struggling. And this is an important moment, and he restored their dignity. And all of a sudden, I think, well, I can't do it maybe as well as he did, but I can do that. And you know the other thing he did that was actually more important than simply healing them physically or restoring their dignity? He spoke to what was going on inside their spirit and spiritually. He pointed them to God. He said, there is something different. There is something better. And I'm inviting you into this. I want you to have the life you were created to live. Will I do what Jesus does? The core of Jesus was at foundational level was compassion. Will I do what Jesus does? His compassion moved him to action, and he said something really important in all of this. He compared hurting people, which at the outset it sounds like kind of, really? He compared hurting people to a field of grain. You're like, that seems kind of callous. He said, it's like a field that's ready to be harvested, and I'm not a farmer, but I do know this. If you don't harvest it when it's time to harvest it, everything gets ruined. And he's simply saying, you have an opportunity, this incredible opportunity in front of you, but it takes action now. Not later, not eventually, not when I get some things figured out, not when I feel like it, now. And here's the thing. Did you know this about broken people, heartbroken people? You don't have to convince them that they're broken. You don't have to convince them that the world around them is broken. They know it. They know it. And you know what they deeply, deeply want? They want Jesus' message to be true. They want it to be true. They want it to be true that God sees them and that God cares about them and God knows what's going on in their life. Everybody wants that to be true. They want to be back in relationship with God. They want the guilt and the shame and the struggle that they feel to go away. They want the new life that he promises. They want an answer for the anxiety and the anger and the broken families and the heartbreak that he offers. Everybody wants it to be true. Well, I don't know about religion. Well, I don't know about the Bible. I don't understand it all. I don't know if I would do all the things that you do. Everybody wants that to be true. And that's what Jesus is saying. When you encounter somebody who's broken, it's important to respond because they really want what is true. They want it. Their brokenness has put them in a position where they are open to what God wants to do in their life. He says it's important to take action at that moment. Will I do what Jesus does? He makes it very clear. He says, I want you to pray and speak. Pray and speak. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple. I want you to pray that people would be there in those moments. They would go out and work those harvest fields. They would take those opportunities. They would point people back to me. They would restore people's dignity. They would meet needs when they can. Pray that people would do that and then speak. Point them back to me. If you keep reading, you get into chapter 10, and it's amazing because what Jesus does is he sends his guys out. He says, I want you to pray, and I want you to speak, and I want you to go. I want you to move into this because what people need is healing, not harassment. What people need is to be reconciled back to God, not to be ridden for their mistakes. You see, you, me, and everybody you're going to meet today doesn't like needing compassion, but we love getting compassion when we need it. So we've been asking questions as we looked at that passage and what Jesus does with compassion and kind of comparing it to what we do and how we think and feel about compassion. But I have a question for you this morning. Do you need his compassion? Do you need somebody to speak into your brokenheartedness today? Then I have a very, very simple prescription for you. Come to Jesus for healing. He's made it so abundantly clear. There's so many people that we read about that he healed them. He worked in their life. He drew them out. He loved them. He restored their dignity. He brought them back into relationship with God. So many people in so many different situations. I know yours is different, but you feel the same pain. And this man bleeds compassion. He wants to give you life. He wants to do all the things that we just talked about. He wants to answer the questions. It doesn't mean everything in your life will magically go away and get better, but it's even better than that. Here's what it does mean. God makes you right with him. And then he walks through the painful moments with you. So if you need compassion, if you've been stuck, I encourage you, come to Jesus for healing. Recognize and realize that the forgiveness that you've been looking for, he can provide. That the life you've been chasing, the frustration that you've been feeling, he has an answer for that. In all the struggles and all the painful moments, he promises to bring healing. And it comes in a very simple, almost too simple to believe way. Simply allow him to become your leader and trust him. Trust him for what? Trust him for your forgiveness. Trust him for your healing. Trust him for directing your life. Come to Jesus for healing. If that's where you're at today, I can't encourage you enough to make that move towards him. In compassion, he will rush over to you. He will restore you. He will build you. He will bring life to you. Maybe you've done that. Maybe you've kind of made that move in your life and you've come to Jesus and you've seen over and over like I have that the pain necessarily doesn't stop. There are things that happen along the way. There's seasons of life, but he keeps meeting me in those seasons with compassion every time. So maybe you've done that. Well, there's maybe a different question you need to answer then. If I've received the compassion of God, what should I do? What do I do with all these hurting people around me? Go for Jesus to bring healing. Either come to Jesus to get healing or go for Jesus to bring healing. Because my guess is this. You got your stuff. I've got mine. We all do. My guess is you also know somebody. You know somebody who's in some stage of heartbreak. Again, it could have been decisions other people made. It could have been losses. It could have been failures. It could have been bad decisions that they made. I don't know. But you know people that are hurting. And you might think to yourself, well, I can't do what Jesus did. I can't like wham, bam, heal somebody. I mean, I can't do that kind of stuff. Jesus is so plain. He says, I'll go with you. I'll work through you. My power will work through you. You can help restore somebody's dignity because I will speak through you. You can point people to God because I will change their hearts. I will use your words to lead them into a relationship with him. So we're either always in this moment of coming to Jesus for healing or going for Jesus to bring healing. You know, it's interesting. There was a missionary. His name was Rick Richardson. And after his whole career of study and doing work in these different foreign countries, and he was also an academic and a researcher, and he did some thinking and surveying and all this other stuff. And what he found was just astounding to me, that 49%, almost half of the people who publicly said they were skeptical about Jesus. Like, I don't know if I believe he is who he said he is. I don't think he was the Son of God. I don't know. I mean, but I'm not on board, and I kind of think maybe he was doing something or tricking people or whatever. People that are skeptical. 49% of the people that were skeptical still associated compassion with Jesus, which is incredible to me. And he goes on to say this. He says, those who engage, and when he says those, he means the followers of Jesus, those who engage the physical, mental, and social needs of their neighbors were the most effective at bringing people to Christ. It's amazing. The tool that Jesus used to build his entire ministry on was compassion. And it was incredibly effective. And he invites us to do the same thing. It's easy to get distracted by all the stuff. All the things that are going on in culture, all the things that are going on in our government, society, and people, and morality, and choices, and people. It's easy to get distracted by all of that. Start throwing people into groups and tagging people and kind of creating distance and buffers and all those other things. And we can do that. Or we begin to see and feel and do what Jesus does and see what happens. I mean, can you imagine for just a moment? Can you imagine if just our church leaned into this message that Jesus is giving? We just made the decision, okay, we're going to just start seeing people as people. It doesn't matter what group you may or may not fall into. It doesn't matter on what we agree on or what we don't agree on. It doesn't even really matter if you are a person of faith or not. I see you. Can you imagine if we just started seeing people? And then in their brokenness, tried to meet their need, worked to help restore their dignity, and pointed them back to Jesus. I can tell you what would happen because it's happened before. We have a whole book that chronicles exactly what happens when people live this way. The people in this community, right here in Arrowhead Ranch, they would have to admit that, you know what, I don't necessarily know that I understand all the things that are happening over at Mountain Ridge Church. I don't really agree with a lot of stuff. I'm not a church person myself, and I like to go once or twice a year just because when I need to or whatever, but it's really not a big deal for me. But man, those people are compassionate. They just keep showing up. Every time somebody's hurting, every time somebody's struggling, they just keep showing up. And I don't know if I believe all this stuff about, new life, eternal life, and Jesus and all this other stuff, but it's hard to argue when I keep seeing people's lives change. People used to be one way, and now they're different. You see, when we live out compassion, not only, here's the crazy insider secret. Not only do we find ourselves being healed, but we find God using us to heal others. That's what it looks like to be compassionate. You see, Jesus gets us. He understands. He sees us for who we are. He loves us, and he steps into our struggles anyway. And then he invites us to do the same. Let's pray together. Father, thank you so much. In the picture of Jesus, we have something that's almost too hard to put into words. Father, it's easy to leave them as stories and just words on a page, but in the middle of our own brokenness, they become avenues of life and healing that speak to our heart. When we see people just like us, people struggling just like we struggled, people feeling the pain that we've felt, we see them find compassion in you. We see them find forgiveness and life, and all the things that we've always wanted to be true are true. Father, it's staggering. Thank you that you do not abandon us in our heartbreak, but you draw us in even closer. Father, as we've sung songs this morning, we've celebrated this supper, if we've looked at your word and tried to listen to you speak to us, we're humbled. But you see us in our everyday mess. You don't look away. You don't ignore. You don't move us to the side. You draw us in. Jesus, with all we can, we worship you and we thank you. It's in his name that we pray. Amen.